I thought I was just heading downstairs to fix my racket. Instead, I overheard a sentence that shattered my marriage and my entire reality. Little by little, the fog in my mind started to lift, and I became aware of my surroundings again. The dim, almost gloomy light in my basement workshop matched my mood. Only a sliver of brightness came through the half-open door. One of my rackets, the one I'd been working on earlier, was still clamped in the vise on my workbench, untouched. From the other side of the partition wall, I could hear the sounds of our two youngest girls laughing and chatting. The faint noise of a Disney movie playing on the old VCR filling the background. I was slouched in my battered old recliner, staring blankly at the digital clock mounted on the wall. It read 12:32. I'd been sitting there for over 30 minutes, lost in thought, barely blinking, just circling the same questions in my head, trying to make sense of something I desperately wished I hadn't overheard. It had all started earlier that evening after Sunday dinner. My wife, Katie, was in the kitchen tidying up, washing dishes and wiping counters, while I had made my way down to the basement to restring a few rackets for the fall racquetball league. I'd been serious about the sport for 7 or 8 years now, squeezing in games several mornings each week before heading off to my job as an engineer at GM. I also committed to at least one evening league every fall, winter, and spring. I took a lot of pride in how quickly I'd improved. I usually played in the top divisions and competed regularly in local tournaments, often finishing near the top. Racquetball had become my way of keeping fit. I'd managed to stay right around 200 pounds on my 6 feet 2 inches frame, and I felt good about that. Our 7-year-old daughter, Emily, had come down with me, planning to watch her favorite movie in the playroom, and as usual her little sister Abby, just 4, had tagged along. Abby was at that age where she didn't want to be left out, especially if Emily was involved. Thankfully, Emily hadn't started minding yet, though I knew that would probably change as she got older. Meanwhile, our oldest, Brian, now 9, had made it pretty clear he was too old, and too much of a big boy, to hang out with his little sisters. He was probably up in his bedroom, either tinkering with his model airplanes or racing his little die-cast cars across the floor. Brian was a lot like me in many ways, same brown hair, hazel eyes, a solid jawline, and a nose that stood out just enough without being too much. Emily, on the other hand, had inherited Katie's striking red hair and more delicate features, while little Abby, with her light blonde hair, seemed to be a mix of both of us, though it was still early to tell for sure. I eventually wrapped up the grips on the 3 rackets I usually kept packed in my gym bag. As I tested the string tension on each one, I made a mental note that a couple could probably use a rest ring. Racket strings have a way of snapping at the worst possible moments, usually right in the middle of a league match. Murphy's Law always seemed to apply on the court. Before heading back upstairs, I peeked in on the girls. They were completely engrossed in the middle of Lady and the Tramp, sitting cross-legged in front of the TV. Seemed like a good time to leave them to it. As I padded up the basement stairs in my socks and approached the slightly open door, I caught the low sound of Katie talking on the phone. On a whim, I thought maybe I'd sneak up on her, wrap my arms around her, catch her off guard. Maybe set the stage for a little something later that night. We'd already had our usual weekend intimacy that morning, but I was still feeling close to her, connected. I leaned in and looked through the narrow crack of the door to see where she was standing. And there she was, Katie, leaning on her elbows against the kitchen counter, her back to me. She was wearing those snug jeans that hugged her just right, and her shirt was hanging loosely, untucked, revealing a bit of her bare stomach and just a sliver of her bra. Her fiery red hair was pulled into a bouncy ponytail that moved as she spoke into the phone. Even after 3 kids and a decade of marriage, Katie still turned heads. She stood about 5 feet 6 inches and kept her weight around 130, thanks to staying active and watching what she ate. Time had softened her edges a bit, but if anything, it had only made her more attractive. She was 23 when we tied the knot. I was just a year older. Sure, life and the kids had slowed our intimacy down a bit over the years, but we still managed to carve out our own time at least a couple times a week. And in that moment, standing there with that view of her, I felt lucky, or at least I thought I was. As I watched from behind the door, I could hear Katie listening intently to something her friend Debbie was saying on the other end of the line. What caught me off guard was the sound of Katie giggling, an honest, youthful giggle I hadn't heard from her since our honeymoon days. It felt out of place, almost surreal. Then her voice dropped lower, softer, and I could barely make out the words, "Yeah. I'd really like to try that again before he gets the procedure." Her choice of words jolted something in me, something unpleasant. I suddenly remembered a conversation I'd had a couple of months back at a bar with a few buddies. The connection hit me hard and unexpected, and I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. I slowly eased myself down onto the top step of the basement stairs and gently pulled the door almost closed behind me, my ears still tuned in. Katie and I had talked in passing about me getting a vasectomy so she could stop taking the pill, but we hadn't come to a decision. Hearing her talk about the procedure with someone else, and sounding excited about it, left me confused. Was she really talking about me? That memory from the bar came flooding in. My friend Craig had been teasing another guy in our group, John, about a story that had all of us howling. Craig kept laughing while John sat there looking like he wanted to disappear. "Oh man," Craig chuckled, "she wants him to get the wart removed." I blinked, confused, and said, "Wait, what am I missing here?" John turned a little red but eventually explained. Ever since puberty he'd had a regular old skin wart on the top of his, private area. He was about to head to the city for a training session, and his wife had apparently suggested it was time to finally take care of it. Debbie, the woman Katie was chatting with on the phone, was married to a guy named Josh, a CPA she'd met while working in Detroit. Katie had told me once that Josh was Debbie's second husband. Debbie and Katie were close in age and had grown closer when they were both pregnant, Katie with Abby and Debbie with her daughter Shannon. The girls had been born just weeks apart, and from that point on, Debbie and Katie had been almost inseparable. Our families hung out now and then, but Katie often vented that motherhood had worn her down. She'd confided once that if she could just catch a break now and then, she might be able to breathe again. I remember feeling a knot in my gut, realizing how absent I'd been. I told her I'd take full responsibility for the kids on my next weekend off if she wanted to get away for a bit. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and thanked me, saying she'd think about it. A couple of weeks later she told me Debbie had mentioned a shopping trip, just the two of them. Said they needed a little time out, away from the chaos of parenting. That weekend came and went. But I remember clearly, we didn't make love that night. She came back from that trip, and others like it, but something was different. It didn't hit me until later, but I started realizing there was a pattern. Before each of those trips, especially in the days leading up to them, Katie would become unusually cheerful, almost giddy. And we always seemed to end up being intimate a few days before she left. At the time I didn't think anything of it. But now looking back I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been off all along. Suddenly I heard Katie's voice echoing down the basement stairs. "Phil, it's time for the girls to take their baths. Can you send them up?" I just sat there for a moment, trying to process everything, trying to quiet the noise in my head. Phil, can you hear me?" Snapping out of my daze, I pushed myself up from the steps and made my way out. As I came up, I tried to shift the mood, clinging to anything normal. "Hey, I was thinking, what if we take the kids to Cedar Point this weekend? It's only open for a few more weeks and we've never taken Abby. She's old enough to enjoy it now." Katie turned to me, her expression changing. A flash of irritation crossed her face, and I could see the redness start creeping into her cheeks, the kind of flush she only got when she was truly frustrated. "We just took the kids to Mackinac Island over Labor Day, Phil. That was barely 2 weeks ago. What's gotten into you? You've never had a problem with me going shopping with Debbie before." I didn't have an answer. Not one I could say out loud, anyway. Shifting gears in my mind, I found myself thinking about school. Back when I was in high school, I wasn't the top student or anything, but I did discover something I genuinely loved: drafting. By senior year, I had taken every drafting course offered. That's when I started thinking seriously about becoming an engineer. After graduation, I decided to enroll at the local junior college. It was affordable, close to home, and offered a decent engineering technology program. My buddy James, who wasn't really sure what he wanted to do yet, ended up tagging along. He enrolled in general studies just to keep moving forward. Not long after, we both enlisted. We found ourselves on a long flight headed for Vietnam. With a little persistence and some behind-the-scenes haggling with the personnel office, we managed to get assigned to the same battery, 2nd Battalion, 11th Artillery Brigade. It was November 1969. Nixon had started the drawdown, trying to hand over more control to the South Vietnamese. What a joke that turned out to be. The first 5 or 6 months were fairly quiet. We ran a lot of fire missions out of support bases scattered around the region, mostly in I Corps territory. Back then, I didn't think too much about clothes or appearances. Most days, I threw on an old hoodie or my worn-out army field jacket. Faded jeans and beat-up sneakers were my standard uniform outside the service too. I wasn't one for fashion, never was. I was stuck in a routine: school, work, then back home. That was it. I could tell my parents and my sister Laura were worried about me, but I just didn't feel connected to anyone anymore. Social interaction felt like something I had forgotten how to do. I was still seeing my therapist at the VA once a month, but it didn't feel like it was helping much. About once a week, I made a point to visit James' parents. We'd sit and talk about him, share stories, laugh about the good times. I think it meant something to them. It definitely did to me. It was my small way of honoring him. One afternoon, a classmate of mine, her name was Rachel, gathered her books after class and said goodbye before heading out. I remember feeling a surprising pang of disappointment watching her leave. She was the first woman I'd really spoken to since returning home. And even though it wasn't anything deep, it still felt significant. A couple of days later, I was sitting in nearly the same spot on campus when I heard her voice again. "Hey, mind if I sit here?" This time I managed a better response, not nearly as tongue-tied as before. I tried to focus on my book, but Rachel spoke to me like we'd known each other for years. It was easy, natural. Not long after, she invited me over for dinner. I remember standing outside her house, unsure of myself before I knocked. The door opened and a kind-looking woman with a warm smile greeted me. Before I could say a word, she said, "You must be Phil, we've been expecting you. Come in." She reached out, took my hand and gently led me inside. Calling over her shoulder, she said, "Jack, Sally's date is here." Then turning back to me, she added with a reassuring smile, "Don't worry about Sally's dad, he's not nearly as intimidating as she makes him out to be. I'm Emily, by the way." She gave my hand a quick shake, still holding it. I wasn't sure how to react. I felt like I was being swept into something warm and welcoming, but unfamiliar. At some point during dinner, Sally's dad, Jack, made a few jokes about Vietnam, and I didn't quite know where I stood in that room. I couldn't tell if I was a real soldier in their eyes or just another guy who served behind the lines. The Marines used to scoff at Army guys like me, especially ones who didn't see much combat. But by the time I got there, most of the Marines had already pulled out. Jack chuckled and muttered, "Vietnamization, what a word. Just a fancy way of saying, good luck, you're on your own." Emily chimed in softly, "It's not over yet," but Jack just shook his head. "It's over. The rest is just noise." Right then, Sally walked into the room and the whole conversation dropped. I was grateful for the interruption. She smiled, and just seeing her made something inside me settle. Later, when we were alone, everything felt right. As we lay there, still tangled up, her body trembling slightly, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Like maybe, just maybe, I was finally starting to come back to life. I felt the warmth of her tears soaking into my neck as she pressed her face tightly against my shoulder. In a quiet voice, I whispered into her ear, "Sally, I love you." I paused, knowing the words might be too soon for her, then added, "I know maybe you're not ready to hear that yet, but I can't help how I feel." She slowly pulled back and looked down at me. Her eyes were glossy with tears, but there was a soft smile forming on her lips. It was small, tentative, but it was there. Things started to shift a couple of months later. Jack and Emily had invited us over for dinner one evening. After we ate, Jack and I drifted into the den while Sally and her mom stayed behind in the kitchen, cleaning up and chatting. We made small talk for a while, work, sports, the usual things. Then Jack grew quiet for a moment as if working up to something. "Sally mentioned that you've got some scars from Vietnam," he said finally. She was wondering how that might have happened. I looked down and away, feeling oddly self-conscious. "Yeah, well, there's a few." "Long story," I muttered, brushing it off, even though I knew it wasn't really a long story, just one I didn't like telling. Sally had always wanted to keep working, even after we had kids. At first, she managed a few shifts a week, usually somewhere between 12 and 20 hours, depending on the schedule. She liked staying active, and the employee discount helped a lot, especially with how fast the kids outgrew their clothes. Once all three were in school full-time, she planned to go back to work more regularly. My own job had changed a lot over the years. Early on, I'd found myself gravitating toward more technical tasks, converting part designs into machine-readable formats, creating control tapes for automated manufacturing systems. I got good at it and found a strange satisfaction in the precision. I loved our kids more than anything. The idea of not being there for them, of losing them in any way, scared me more than anything I saw in the war. But even more terrifying was the quiet, nagging thought that maybe Sally didn't feel the same way about me anymore. The days that followed felt like I was moving through a fog. I showed up at work, went through the motions at home, but my mind wasn't with me. I couldn't focus. Sally didn't pick up on it right away, not until Brian asked her, "Is Dad okay? He's acting kind of weird." I brushed it off, telling her I was just buried in a tough project at work. By Tuesday, I tried to pull myself back into my routine. Got up early and went to play racquetball before work like I usually did. My friend John was already there waiting. For a little while, the rhythm of the game helped quiet my mind. Sally's parents had always loved spending time with the kids. Anytime they had the chance, they'd jump at it. I think it made them feel young again, and maybe, in some way, helped them hold on to something that was slipping away from all of us. I told my parents I needed to talk. We ended up sitting around the kitchen table, each of us with a glass of iced tea, the silence stretching as I searched for the right words. Finally, I exhaled, heavy with the weight of it, and said, "I don't know how else to say this, so I'm just going to come out with it. I think Katie's been seeing someone else." The second the words left my mouth, I felt the tears come. I didn't even try to hold them back. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, the unthinkable, and the weight of that truth shattered something in me. I broke down, nearly sobbing in front of them. Later that evening, Katie reached out and lightly touched my hand, her voice soft. "Right after my period ends, I'll make it up to you. I promise." I could barely stop myself from pulling my hand away. "Okay," I mumbled, the word catching in my throat. "It's a date then," she said, giving me a quick hug before turning back to the stove, humming softly as she started dinner. I turned and walked up the stairs slowly, needing space to breathe. The realization hit me like a punch. Katie's periods had always been like clockwork as long as she stayed on the pill. She wasn't withholding because of timing, she was preparing for someone else. Someone not me. I didn't need any more signs. If I'd had any doubt about where I stood, it was gone now. That burning knot of anger began to grow in my chest again. And that voice, the one that had started whispering a few weeks back, was now shouting. The next day, I got the kids packed and took them over to my parents' place. When we pulled into the driveway, Mom and Dad were already outside, waiting. I unloaded everything, got the kids settled, gave them all hugs, and started to head out. Dad walked with me to the car. He looked concerned, like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. Finally, he just said, "Good luck, Phil. I really hope you're wrong." I nodded and sighed. "Me too, Dad. Thanks for taking them. I'll call in the morning." From there, I drove toward the airport. On the way, I stopped at Avis and swapped out my car. I didn't want to risk being recognized where I was going. Hours later, I found myself back in my own kitchen. It was quiet, too quiet. I was still sitting there, staring at the counter, lost in thought. The idea of confronting the truth felt heavier than anything I'd faced in Vietnam. And then another dark thought crept in: if I brought a gun with me tonight, I might never return. I might never see my kids again. The thought lingered, sharp and heavy. Eventually, I stood up, walked over to the old wooden cabinet, and crouched down. In the back corner of the bottom drawer was an old, worn-out shoebox. I pulled it out slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. I took the old shoebox upstairs and emptied it out on the kitchen table. Inside were bits and pieces from different parts of my life. Photos, keepsakes, scraps of old letters. I rummaged through it all until I found what I was looking for. It was the marine knife I'd picked up in Bangkok all those years ago. I ran my fingers along the edge. It was still sharp, still deadly. I stared at it for a moment before slipping it back into its sheath. I wasn't entirely sure why I'd taken it out in the first place. Maybe just to remind myself that I still had control over something. Later that night, I found myself outside a quiet motel. I parked just far enough away to keep from being noticed but close enough to see clearly. Under the glow of the overhead light, 4 figures were standing in front of one of the rooms, talking and laughing. I couldn't hear much, but they looked like they were in the middle of a light-hearted debate about something. After a minute or two, I saw John pull a coin from his pocket, flip it into the air, and catch it with a grin, showing it to the others like they were deciding something by chance. I walked up to the door and knocked, twice with purpose. It opened and John looked surprised. "What the?" he started to say. I didn't give him time to finish. All the frustration, pain, and betrayal surged through me in that moment. There was no plan, no strategy, just a need to confront the truth I'd been too afraid to face. The room fell into chaos. I didn't need to see more. The state of the room, the atmosphere, the stunned silence after the initial shock. It said everything. Then I heard the water in the bathroom stop. A moment later, I recognized her voice. "Hey John boy, I thought you were getting in with me. What's taking so long?" Sally's voice. Carefree, even playful. And then the bathroom door opened. She stepped out, hair wet, drying herself with a towel. She froze when she saw me standing there. Her expression shifted instantly, from confusion to horror. There was no need for yelling. No words could make this right. I just looked at her and she looked back at me. For the first time in a long time, there was no mask between us. I turned and walked out, not saying a word. Some things speak for themselves. Let me know when you're ready to continue. I took one deliberate step forward, and in a flash of anger I couldn't contain, lashed out. He didn't react, didn't make a sound. There was a sharp gasp from the bed, and I turned to see Debbie, sitting up against the headboard, clutching the sheet to her chest, eyes wide with shock and fear. "I don't even know what I did to make her feel this way," I muttered, flat and hollow. Later the accusations came. "She said you got violent with two of Debbie's friends last night," someone said, their tone accusing. "Hurt them bad." "They're lucky I didn't do worse," I said, my voice dry with sarcasm. "Phil, what the hell?" Jack asked, clearly rattled. "That doesn't sound like you." I sat there thinking about what to say. Then instead of answering his question I asked my own. "Did she mention where it supposedly happened?" "She said it happened outside a restaurant," he replied, unsure. I nodded slowly as if that confirmed something I already knew. Then I turned to Sally. "Take off your clothes," I said. "What?" she replied, confused, stunned. "You heard me. Take off your clothes," I repeated calmly. "What's the matter? Your dad's seen you without clothes before. It's not going to shock him." She just sat there, staring at me in disbelief. Jack was shaking his head now, completely lost. I shrugged. "Okay," I said softly. "That's what I thought." Everything I was feeling, the fury, the heartache, the grief, it welled up in my chest and filled the room with silence. After a long pause I looked at her again. "You weren't just part of my life," I said quietly. "You gave me something I didn't think I could have. You made me want to live again after I came back broken. You gave me hope and 3 incredible kids. And for that, no matter what happens, I'll always be grateful." We sat in stillness for what felt like forever. Then finally Jack cleared his throat and said in a quiet, steady voice, "So what happens now, Phil?" I turned my head toward him, feeling the exhaustion seep into my bones. "Jack, I've been betrayed twice in my life. And both times it cost me my best friend." I looked down at the table, trying to steady myself. "Debbie and I, well, we got them to agree to a cover story. We figured if they didn't make noise, maybe it wouldn't reach their wives. We convinced them to say it happened outside a bar. I didn't think they'd come clean. Then it hit me hard and sudden. They couldn't change their story now without destroying their credibility." In that moment, a strange relief settled over me. For a second I felt lighter. Like maybe, just maybe, I had a way out. But then reality rushed back in. The truth was still here. Everything I'd built was collapsing around me. And no version of this ended without something precious being lost. I let out a grunt, the kind that says more than words, and asked flatly, "So, where are they now?" Sally cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable, and shifted in her seat. "You remember how I told you that Debbie's marriage to Josh was her second one? And that she was pretty much estranged from her parents?" She paused, then added, "Well, turns out Debbie has a sister. Her name's Sarah. Lives upstate. They haven't been close for years." She glanced up at me, then down at her hands again. "About a year ago, Josh was doing an audit for a company up there. Turns out, one of the employees he worked with was Sarah, Debbie's sister. Sarah knew Debbie had remarried, and Josh had heard about a sister, but neither of them had ever met until then. Funny how life throws people together like that." She hesitated, then continued. "They ended up hitting it off. I guess there was this night, just before the audit wrapped up, when things got complicated." I stayed quiet, letting her talk. "I didn't expect to see John that night," she said, her voice quieter now. "We were at that little Italian place by the highway. Debbie introduced him to me like it was a total coincidence. Said she knew him from high school and that he was just passing through. I didn't believe that for a second, but I kept my mouth shut." She bit her lip and looked away as if trying to block out the memory. "John was on his best behavior. That charm of his was dialed up all night. He flirted with both of us, danced, poured compliments like wine. I'd had more to drink than usual, and maybe I let my guard down. On the dance floor, his hands started to wander." She trailed off, her voice thick with shame. "It didn't seem like anything would happen. We were just having fun, that's all I told myself. Everyone was laughing. It felt innocent." Her next words came slower, heavier. "After we got back to the motel, we didn't really say anything. We just went to our rooms. Debbie and Craig went into theirs. And John and I—" She didn't finish the sentence. Just stared down at her hands, the silence between us deafening. With bitterness rising in my throat, I looked at her and said, "So, was it everything you hoped it would be?" Sally's eyes filled with tears. She looked like she could barely breathe. "It was okay," she said, voice cracking. "It wasn't better than what you and I had. Not really." She hesitated, trying to find the words. "What made it feel intense was how wrong it was. That it was new. I could pretend to be someone else. I turned away from her and muttered, "Yeah? And why shouldn't I believe that?" Sally broke down completely then, her voice shaking, tears streaming down her face. "It was only 3 or 4 nights a year, Phil. That's all. I never saw John or Craig or anyone else outside those weekends. I swear. Please, please, I'm begging you. Can't you forgive me? Let me fix this, let me make it right." Her words echoed in the kitchen, but they felt a million miles away. "Forgive you?" I asked quietly, my voice heavy with hurt. "You want me to forgive you for what? For a few nights a year when you gave yourself to someone else? For giving away the part of you that meant the most to me, your heart, your trust, your loyalty?" I looked her in the eye, my voice breaking as I continued. "You're asking me to forget that you let someone else into what I thought was ours alone. That you became a different person for them, while I sat at home thinking I still knew the woman I married." The room was still, except for the sound of her crying. I didn't yell. I didn't slam anything. I just stood there, the weight of it all pressing down on me. This was the woman I had shared my life with, the mother of my children, and now, a stranger I no longer recognized.